The president teased the tariffs on semiconductors that could be set as soon as next week. Those tariffs could be between 200% and 300%.
It's bananas, it's berserk, and it's a little bit crazy all at once.
President Trump has declared that tariffs of 200 to 300% on semiconductors are coming within weeks.
Donald Trump has spent much of his second term attempting to bend institutions to his will, from academia to the legal system. Now, he's turning the screws on some of the most powerful tech titans in the world.
What if I told you that Donald Trump's boldest plan, yet the shocking 300% tariff on microchips, might already be doomed before it even begins? On paper, it looks like the ultimate power move. Tariffs so high they could force the world's biggest tech companies to bring factories back to American soil. It's a headline designed to project strength, to show that the United States is finally taking control of its future in technology and manufacturing. But behind the applause and the outrage lies a dangerous secret. This plan isn't just risky. It may actually collapse under its own weight. Because the one thing Washington doesn't want to admit is that America doesn't control all the pieces on this chessboard. The real power lies somewhere else. Not in Silicon Valley. Not in Beijing. But just across the northern border, Canada, quiet, steady, often overlooked, now holds resources that the U.S. simply cannot replace. Minerals and energy that fuel the very heart of chip-making, AI, and defense. Without them, Trump's tariffs are nothing more than a show of force with no real bite. And the shocking truth? Ottawa knows that what's unfolding isn't just a trade dispute. It's a battle over who controls the future of technology, energy, and power itself. And right now, America may be walking straight into a trap of its own making. When Donald Trump stood at the podium and hinted at tariffs as high as 300% on semiconductor chips, it sent shockwaves through the global markets. Not 10%, not even 50%, but numbers so extreme they almost sounded unreal. 200%, 300%. Tariffs so massive they would instantly transform the cost of every smartphone, every car, every computer, every single device that relies on microchips. Trump framed it as a bold declaration of war on outsourcing. His message was simple. If tech giants wanted to avoid these crushing costs, they had no choice but to pack up their overseas operations and start building factories right here in the United States. It was a carrot and stick approach. Manufacture in America and enjoy lower costs, but stay abroad and face devastating tariffs that could wipe out profit margins overnight. The announcement fit perfectly with Trump's campaign promise to bring jobs home and rebuild American manufacturing. For his supporters, it was proof that he wasn't afraid to go big, that he was ready to hit multinational corporations where it hurt the most. It was in every way classic Trump, dramatic headline grabbing, and framed as a direct challenge to both China and America's own corporate elite. But here's the problem. Behind the fiery rhetoric and the applause lines was a plan that looked more like political theater than actual economic policy. Because while tariffs sound powerful, they don't magically create new factories. They don't conjure up skilled engineers out of thin air. And they don't solve the one problem that sits at the very heart of the semiconductor industry. America simply doesn't control all the resources needed to make this plan work. Even within Washington, analysts were stunned. Economists called it bananas, berserk, even crazy. Industry insiders whispered that the White House had no roadmap for how companies could realistically meet these demands. Yes, tariffs might make headlines, but could they really rebuild a supply chain as complicated as microchips in a single year? And the deeper you look, the more impossible the picture becomes. Because semiconductors are not like steel or lumber. They're not just about factories and machines. They're about precision, rare minerals, ultra-clean environments, and a workforce of thousands trained in skills that take decades to develop. No country, not even the United States, can simply snap its fingers and recreate that overnight. Trump promised the tariffs would be set next week and the week after. But industry leaders already knew the truth. The timeline was fantasy. America could raise the cost of imports, but unless something changed, it couldn't replace what it was losing. And this was the weakness at the core of Trump's bold plan, a weakness that his rivals and even his allies were ready to exploit. The idea of bringing chip production back to America sounds powerful, almost patriotic, but the reality? It's far more complicated and far more brutal than most people realize. Semiconductors aren't just another manufactured product. They're the lifeblood of modern technology, the invisible foundation of everything from iPhones to fighter jets. And making them isn't like stamping out car parts or rolling steel. It's one of the most advanced, resource-heavy, and time-consuming industries on Earth. To build a state-of-the-art chip fabrication plant, known as a fab, takes years, not months. We're talking billions of dollars in construction, miles of ultra-clean air-controlled rooms, and machinery so advanced that only a handful of companies on the planet even know how to build it. A single lithography machine, used to etch tiny circuits onto silicon wafers, can cost over $200 million. And even then, the supply of those machines is dominated by just one European company, and the workforce? You can't just hire thousands of engineers overnight. These are highly trained specialists, many of whom spent decades working in Asia, where the industry has been centered for years. America has brilliant minds, yes, but not nearly enough of them to suddenly match the scale of Taiwan, South Korea, or China. Even worse, chips aren't just about machines and workers. They depend on raw materials, rare and often overlooked minerals like gallium, cobalt, and germanium. These resources are scattered around the world, and the uncomfortable truth is that the United States doesn't control them. China still dominates the supply of rare earths. And while tariffs can make imported chips more expensive, they can't change the fact that without these minerals, production grinds to a halt. This is why experts were baffled when Trump insisted that within a year, America could simply rebuild what took other nations decades to master. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The materials don't exist. And the skilled workforce doesn't exist in the numbers required. Tariffs, no matter how high, can't build fabs. They can't mine rare earths. They can't train engineers. All they can do is raise prices for consumers and risk pushing companies into chaos. And this is where the first cracks in Trump's bold plan began to show. Because if America couldn't produce everything on its own, it meant that someone else, somewhere else, held the power to make or break the plan. And that someone wasn't China. It wasn't Europe. It was a country that most Americans rarely think about when it comes to high technology. Canada. While Trump was promising to slam China with sky-high tariffs and daring U.S. corporations to fall in line, there was one critical detail he overlooked. America doesn't actually hold all the cards in this game. In fact, one of the most powerful pieces on the board belongs to a country that almost never makes global headlines for technology, Canada. For decades, Canada has been seen as America's friendly neighbor, stable, reliable, and focused on oil, lumber, and trade. But hidden beneath those stereotypes is a resource so vital that Washington cannot replace it, no matter how many tariffs it throws around. That resource is germanium. Now, most people have never even heard of germanium. It doesn't sound as dramatic as gold or oil, but in the world of semiconductors, defense technology, and next-gen electronics, germanium is priceless. This element is what allows chips to run faster, fiber optics to carry more data, and night vision systems to function on the battlefield. Silicon alone can't deliver these capabilities. Germanium is the secret ingredient that makes advanced technology possible. And here's the kicker. The only major North American supply of germanium comes from one place, Trail, British Columbia. A single smelter employing just 1,500 people produces the vast majority of this critical mineral. If that supply is disrupted, the U.S. has no easy alternative. There's no stockpile waiting to be tapped. No quick replacement source in Europe or Asia. Without Canada's germanium, America's semiconductor dreams come to a grinding halt. Industry analysts quietly call it indispensable. Defense experts warn that it's not just about smartphones and laptops, it's about military readiness, satellites, and weapon systems. In other words, this isn't just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. And that means Canada, often dismissed as a junior partner, suddenly finds itself with leverage more powerful than any tariff Trump can announce. Because think about it, tariffs are supposed to pressure foreign governments. But what happens when the very resources America needs to survive those tariffs are sitting across the border, controlled by Ottawa? That's not leverage for Washington, that's leverage for Canada, and Canada knows it. Far from scrambling to meet Trump's demands, Ottawa has been quietly investing billions into expanding its role as a secure supplier of critical minerals. Dozens of new projects are underway in British Columbia and Ontario, backed by tens of billions of Canadian dollars. Instead of bowing to U.S. pressure, Canada is positioning itself as the gatekeeper of resources the world will need for decades to come. So, while Trump may roar about tariffs and punishments, the cold reality is this. America cannot build its chip empire without Canada's cooperation. And in the high-stakes game of global supply chains, that gives Ottawa the kind of power it has never had before. But germanium is just the beginning. Because Canada's true advantage doesn't stop with minerals, it extends into something even more essential, something that every factory, every data center, and every AI supercomputer desperately needs to survive. If rare minerals like germanium are the hidden gems of Canada's power, then energy is the foundation of its dominance. Because while minerals power the chips themselves, energy powers the entire system, from the factories that build them, to the data centers that run them, to the defense networks that protect them. And here's the blunt truth. The United States cannot sustain its technological ambitions without Canada's energy. For years, Americans have been told that the U.S. is energy independent. Politicians love repeating it, pointing to Texas oil fields, shale gas, and massive domestic reserves. But the fine print tells a different story. Yes, America produces huge amounts of energy, but its industries and its people are locked into supply chains that still depend heavily on Canadian imports. Every single day, more than 4 million barrels of Canadian oil flow south through pipelines like Keystone. That's not a luxury, it's a lifeline. Without that flow, U.S. refineries would grind to a halt, gasoline prices would skyrocket, and industries from plastics to aviation would feel the shock almost instantly. Natural gas is no different. Over 8.5 billion cubic feet per day crosses the border, feeding American homes, factories, and power plants. And the number is climbing, not shrinking. In fact, demand for Canadian gas surged 7% just last year. Then there's uranium. Nearly 27% of America's imported uranium comes directly from Canada, keeping the lights on for a big part of the U.S. nuclear fleet. And let's not forget hydroelectricity. Clean Canadian power flows into northern U.S. states, enough to supply 1 million American households every single year. Put all of this together, and the picture becomes clear. Canada isn't just another trading partner, it is the largest energy supplier to the United States. Oil, gas, electricity, uranium. Canada is the quiet giant that keeps America's engines running. And that matters now more than ever, because Trump's 300% chip tariffs are colliding with a new reality, the AI revolution. Artificial intelligence is not just about software, it's about hardware. And hardware requires staggering amounts of energy. Data centers powering AI systems are monsters of electricity consumption. A single AI campus can draw over a gigawatt of power, the same as 1 million homes. In Virginia, home to the largest concentration of data centers in the world, energy demand is projected to double in just 15 years. And that's only one region. From Oregon to Texas, AI centers are multiplying, each one hungry for more power than traditional grids can easily supply. Now, add to that Trump's dream of bringing semiconductor fabs back to U.S. soil. These factories are some of the most energy-intensive facilities on Earth. They need stable, massive, around-the-clock power, which means America's new wave of industrial build-out is going to collide head-on with its already surging electricity needs. So the question is simple. Where will that energy come from? The answer, once again, is Canada. The oil that keeps trucks moving. The gas that keeps turbines running. The uranium that fuels nuclear plants. The hydropower that stabilizes the grid. Without these flows, America's AI and chip ambitions collapse under their own weight. And here's where the irony cuts deep. Trump has been threatening tariffs on Canadian goods, believing Washington holds the upper hand. But the truth is reversed. Because while America can punish Canada with taxes, Canada can squeeze America with something far more powerful. Resources that simply cannot be replaced. Prime Minister Mark Carney understands this leverage. He's not rushing into one-sided deals. Instead, he's doubling down, expanding critical mineral projects, reinforcing energy exports, and even exploring new trade routes to Europe and Asia. Canada is sending a quiet but unmistakable message. America may be the bigger economy, but Canada is the one holding the keys to its future. That's why some analysts now warn that the real superpower in this trade standoff isn't the United States at all, it's Canada. Not because it has the bigger military or the larger economy, but because it controls the two things America cannot do without: the minerals to build tomorrow's technology and the energy to keep it all running. And while Canada strengthened its hand, Trump's tariff war was beginning to show cracks in the one place he could least afford it, inside the United States itself. By the end of the summer, it was clear that Trump's tariff offensive wasn't unfolding the way Washington had planned. Instead of forcing quick concessions from Canada and isolating China, the global trade battlefield was shifting in ways that revealed a far deeper struggle. One that tariffs alone could never control. Trump wanted immediate victories. His style has always been about bold headlines, dramatic announcements, and quick political wins he could point to as proof of American strength. A 300% tariff on chips? Perfect headline material. A promise to rebuild American manufacturing overnight? Exactly the kind of message that plays well on the campaign trail. But in the real world, the economics told a different story. Tariffs raised prices, but they didn't build factories. They scared companies, but they didn't create supply chains. They made imports more expensive, but they didn't magically summon rare minerals, skilled engineers, or gigawatts of power. All they really did was create pressure, and in that pressure, America's rivals found their opening. Canada seized it by turning resources into leverage. Instead of being cornered, Ottawa stood firm, poured billions into its own industries, and showed Washington that minerals and energy can't be bullied into existence. By holding back diversifying trade and reinforcing its domestic strength, Canada turned itself from a junior partner into a critical power broker. China seized it by tightening its grip on rare earths and building resilience into its energy systems. Rather than fighting tariff with tariff, Beijing went deeper, restructuring its supply chains, exploiting America's dependence, and ensuring that in the next confrontation, it would be even harder to pressure. And the United States? It found itself in the middle, caught between political theater and economic reality. Consumers faced rising prices. Corporations faced mounting costs. And the very supply chains Trump wanted to secure were now more dependent on foreign partners than ever. This is the bigger picture that often gets lost in the noise. Trade wars aren't just about numbers on a tariff sheet. They're about who controls the foundations of the future. Critical minerals, reliable energy, the capacity to endure when pressure mounts. Those are the real weapons of economic power, and right now, America doesn't control them. So when Trump talks about bringing back jobs or declaring victory in AI, the uncomfortable truth is that the U.S. can't do it alone. Not without Canada's germanium. Not without Canada's energy. Not without Chinese rare earths. The very resources that power the modern economy lie outside America's borders, and tariffs don't change that. They only highlight it. Which means this trade war isn't just about economics. It's about time. Who can endure longer? Who can adapt faster? And who can turn short-term pain into long-term dominance? For Canada, the answer has been patience and resilience. For China, it's been strategy and restructuring. For America, the clock is ticking, and every day that passes without a clear plan makes the dream of true independence slip further away. And that's why this fight is bigger than Trump, bigger than tariffs, and bigger than politics. It's a struggle over the future of technology, energy, and power itself. A contest that will decide not just who controls the markets today, but who controls the world of tomorrow. In the end, Trump's 300% chip tariff plan was never just about economics, it was about power. It was about projecting strength, forcing companies and countries to bend, and showing the world that America could take control of its technological destiny. On the surface, it sounded bold, but when the dust settled, the cracks were impossible to ignore, because tariffs alone can't build factories. They can't train thousands of engineers overnight. They can't mine germanium or nickel out of thin air. And they can't generate the gigawatts of energy needed to fuel the AI revolution. At best, tariffs are a blunt instrument, loud, attention-grabbing, but too clumsy to solve the intricate web of dependencies that make up the modern economy, and this is where Trump's plan stumbled. While Washington tried to strong-arm its partners, Canada and China played smarter. Canada turned its resources into leverage, refusing to be rushed into bad deals and instead investing in its future. Its minerals, its energy, its unity at home all became shields against American pressure and weapons to strengthen its global role. China, meanwhile, went even deeper. By tightening its grip on rare earths and restructuring its energy system, Beijing ensured that U.S. pressure would hit walls it couldn't break. Every tariff Trump announced only reminded the world how dependent America still was on the very countries it was trying to punish. For ordinary Americans, the impact was immediate and painful. Rising car prices, soaring grocery bills, inflated costs for everyday goods. The promise of America First was colliding with the reality of global interdependence. And instead of making the U.S. stronger, tariffs were exposing just how fragile its supply chains really are. So what does this all mean? It means that the real contest isn't over tariff rates, it's over resilience. Who can adapt? Who can endure? Who can control the resources and the infrastructure that the future depends on? Those are the players who will lead in the 21st century. Right now, Canada is securing that role through energy and minerals. China is securing it through rare earths and strategic patience. And America? America is at a crossroads. Either it finds a way to truly rebuild its foundations, or it risks watching the next generation of technology slip beyond its grasp. Tariffs may create headlines, but they don't create futures. The nations that will win the battles ahead are the ones building strength quietly, patiently, and decisively. And that's the lesson Washington may not want to admit, but one it can't afford to ignore. Because if the United States fails to secure its own supply chains, it won't just lose a trade war. It could lose the race for the very technologies that define power in the modern age. And in that race, the stakes aren't measured in tariffs or dollars. They're measured in something far greater. Who controls the future?